Welcome back to Verbal Sparring, and welcome to the State of the UFC, February 2025. If you are new to the channel, this series is basically a monthly video where we break down all of the fights by the numbers that happened from January all the way up through December. For the month of February, we saw 4 UFC events, and we will start by breaking down the first event of the month, which took place in Saudi Arabia, and finish off by talking about the final event of the month that took place in Seattle, Washington. We will also touch on how the pound-for-pound rankings stand heading into the month of March. We will talk about UFC newcomers that got big victories in their debut fights, and much more, and we will start with UFC Saudi Arabia. This card would feature 11 fights in total with 4 KO TKOs and 7 decisions. We saw 2 knockouts in the first round and 2 in the second round. And for the decisions, 6 of them were unanimous and 1 coming by way of split. We saw 3 fights from the big boys at heavyweight, 2 fights apiece at middleweight, lightweight, and featherweight, and 1 fight at bantamweight and women's flyweight. The first women's fight for the UFC to ever take place in Saudi Arabia. It was between Jasmine Jasudavicius and Mayra Bueno Silva. There was quite a large impact on the UFC rankings from this card, and it started in that main event because the number 5 ranked Nassourdine Imavov knocked out the number 2 ranked Israel Adesanya in the main event just 30 seconds into the second round. Due to that massive victory for Imavov, which would put his win streak to 4, he would go from number 5 to number 2 in the rankings. Israel Adesanya would drop from number 2 to number 4. And the 4th ranked Robert Whittaker, former champion, would drop 1 spot to number 5. We would see the number 15 ranked welterweight Michael Venom Page step up to middleweight to take on the number 14 ranked undefeated at that time, Shara Magomedov, where Michael Venom Page will get the very convincing unanimous decision victory and become the first person to ever defeat Shara Bullet. Shara would drop that number 14 ranking and move to unranked. We would then see the 15th ranked Michelle Pereira rise 2 spots to number 13, and 2 unranked fighters make their appearances into the rankings. It was Roman Kopylov going to number 14, and Bo Nickel, the undefeated wrestler out of Penn State, going to number 15. The heavyweight division would see all sorts of movement because of results of the card and because of a fighter getting released in the aftermath of the card. We would see the 4th ranked former interim title challenger Sergey Pavlovich defeat the number 9 ranked Jairzinho Rozenstruik via decision in what would end the 2-fight skid of Pavlovich. And in the aftermath of this fight, we would find out that Jairzinho Rozenstruik would be released from the UFC. Therefore, his number 9 ranking was up for grabs. And taking that spot was the number 10 ranked Derek Lewis, and the number 11 ranked Tai Tuivasa bumped up to number 10. And staying in the heavyweight division, the 14th ranked Shamil Gaziev will get a brutal one-punch knockout over Thomas Peterson in the first round of their bout. Shamil would rise 3 spots all the way up to number 11. The 13th ranked Waldo Cortez Acosta would rise to number 12. The number 15 Mick Parson would rise 2 spots to number 13, and, much like the middleweight division, we would see 2 unranked fighters debut into the top 15. It was Dontel Mays rising to number 14, and Janata Deniz rising to number 15. And lastly, in the women's flyweight division, we would see Jasmine Jasudavicius, who was number 12, defeat the number 7 ranked bantamweight and former title challenger at 135, Mayra Bueno Silva, via decision, the biggest win of Jasmine's UFC career thus far. And because of the result of this fight, there were massive changes to the flyweight division and massive changes to the bantamweight division. First, the number 12 ranked flyweight Jasmine would crack into the top 10 for the first time at number 9. Mayra Bueno Silva would drop 1 spot in the bantamweight rankings from 7 to number 8. And we would also see the unranked flyweight Mayra Bueno Silva break into the top 15 and capping it out at that 15th spot, even in a losing effort. We would see Viviane Araujo and Tracy Cortez both rise 1 spot to 9 and 10 respectively. Then Karine Silva, Ariane Da Silva, formerly known as Ariane Lipski, and Miranda Maverick all bump up 2 spots each. And the unranked Casey O'Neill would come back into the rankings, this time at number 14. And then in the bantamweight division, due to Mayra Bueno Silva's loss and drop back to 1 spot, we saw 4 moves. The number 11 ranked Eileen Perez bounced up 4 spots all the way up to number 7, and she is on a 5-fight win streak currently. And then Carol Rosa, Yana Santos, and Misha Tate would all drop 1 spot. Next, we will move into the UFC pay-per-view for February, UFC 312, which took place in Sydney, Australia, in the rematch in the main event between Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. This card would feature 12 fights in total with 2 knockouts, 1 submission, 8 decisions, and the first draw of the year. Both knockouts came in the first round, and the lone submission came in the third round. All 8 fights that went to the judges' scorecards were unanimous decisions, and the lone draw was a majority draw, meaning 2 of the 3 judges had the fight tied. 9 weight classes saw action on this UFC 312 card, with 1 fight apiece happening at heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, featherweight, bantamweight, and women's flyweight and strawweight. The only 2 weight classes with more than 1 fight was welterweight with 2 and lightweight with 3. And in terms of the rankings, it was pretty straightforward, as this card saw a lot of unranked fighters and UFC debutants, which you'll see heavily later on in this episode. Dricus du Plessis defended his title for the second time and improved to 2-0 against Sean Strickland in the UFC 312 main event. As a result, the number 1 ranked Sean Strickland bounced back to number 2, and the number 2 ranked Nassourdine Imavov went up to number 1. And in the co-main event, Zhang Weili would defend her title once more, this time by becoming the first woman to ever defeat Tatiana Suarez. The number 1 ranked Suarez would drop to number 2, and the number 2 ranked former title challenger Yan Xiaonan would rise to number 1. Now we'll transition into the lone UFC Apex fight night of February, and that was UFC Vegas 102, headlined by Jared Cannonier, the Killer Gorilla, and Gregory Rodriguez, the RoboCop. This card would also feature 12 fights, and it would have 4 KO TKOs, 2 submissions, and 6 decisions. We had 3 knockouts in the first round and 1 knockout in the 4th round, the first finish to come in the championship round so far this year. We saw 1 submission in the first round and 1 submission in the second round. And of the 6 decisions, 5 were unanimous and 1 split. Much like UFC 312, this Fight Night card would also feature action from 9 different weight classes, with 1 fight occurring in the heavyweight, welterweight, lightweight, bantamweight, flyweight, women's bantamweight, and women's strawweight divisions. And also like UFC 312, there were just 2 weight classes that saw more than 1 fight. It was middleweight with 3 and featherweight with 2. We would see the unranked but surging Youssef Zalal improve his win streak to 7 and 4-0 in the UFC since making his re-debut, and he got the biggest win of his career with a unanimous decision over the 10th ranked Calvin Kattar. Youssef Zalal would crack into the rankings for the first time and currently sits at number 12. Calvin Kattar would drop 4 spots after his loss to number 14. Then Lerone Murphy and Giga Chikadze would both rise 1 spot to number 10 and number 11, and the 14th ranked Dan Ige would drop 1 spot to number 15 to cap out the rankings. And in the women's bantamweight division, we would see the 13th ranked Jacqueline Cavalcanti continue her momentum by getting a unanimous decision over the 12th ranked Julia Avila. Jacqueline would rise 2 spots to number 11. Julia Avila would drop from number 12 to number 15, and since then has actually been removed from the rankings and replaced by Jocelyn Edwards, and that is because Julia Avila retired in the aftermath of this fight. The 11th ranked Miesha Tate would drop from number 11 to number 12, and the 15th ranked Nora Conrol would rise 2 spots to number 13. And last but not least, we will finish it with UFC Seattle in what would be the UFC's first trip to that specific city up in the Pacific Northwest for the first time since 2013. This card would also feature 12 fights, with 6 KO TKOs, 2 submissions, and just 4 decisions. 3 knockouts would come in the first round, and 3 would come in the second round. Both submissions happened in round number 1. And of the 4 decisions, we saw a little bit of everything. We saw 1 unanimous, 2 split, and a technical decision, the first of the year, and something that is very rare in general. We would see 3 fights apiece at light heavyweight, middleweight, and bantamweight, 1 fight at 170 pounds, and 2 fights at featherweight. Although there was controversy in the main event between Song Yadong and Henry Cejudo, we would see Song Yadong rise 2 spots from number 8 to number 6 after this technical decision win. Henry Cejudo would drop 2 spots from 7 to 9, Marlon Chito Vera would drop 1 spot from 6 to 7, and Rob Font would rise from 9 to 8. Part of that is also due to the fact that Rob Font competed on this card and defeated the unranked short-notice replacement Jean Matsumoto via decision. In the middleweight division, we would see the number 12 ranked Anthony Hernandez improve his win streak to 7 in a row and go 2-0 against the number 9 ranked Brendan Allen. He got a decision victory. Anthony would replace Brendan Allen, jumping from number 12 to number 9. However, Brendan Allen would only drop 1 spot from 9 to 10. Then we would see the 10th ranked Roman Dolidze and the 11th ranked Paulo Costa both drop one spot to 11 and 12. And last but not least, Alonzo Minifield, the 15th ranked light heavyweight, would take on short notice replacement and undefeated prospect Julius Walker in a fight of the night where Minifield would get the decision win. Minifield would rise one spot to number 14, and Anthony Smith would drop one spot from 14 to 15, just swapping places. Now let's touch on the pound-for-pound rankings as we head into the month of March. First, for the women, we see the number 1 ranked Valentina Shevchenko remain at number 1, and capping out the top 15 would be Macy Barber. And although these fights aren't happening in March, it is worth noting that Valentina Shevchenko is slated to take on Manon Fiorot in May in a title defense. That is number 1 in the world versus number 5 in the world. The 10th ranked Jian Xiaonan is slated to face the 12th ranked Virna Jandiroba in April. The 3rd ranked pound for pound and former champion Alexa Grasso is slated to take on the 13th ranked surging Natalia Silva. That is also in May on the same card as Shevchenko versus Fiorot. And the 14th ranked Jessica Andrade at pound for pound is taking on the surging Jasmine Jasudavicius, which is also on that same card in May, UFC 315 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And for the men's pound-for-pound rankings, the king is still Islam Makhachev, the lightweight champion, and at number 15 is the former middleweight champion, Sean Strickland. Alex Pereira is currently number 3 pound-for-pound, and he is slated to take on Magomed Ankalaev in what will be his 4th attempt at defending his light heavyweight championship. That goes down March 8th at UFC 313. The 4th-ranked Ilia Topuria has elected to vacate his featherweight championship and set his eyes on the lightweight division, so we'll see what comes from him here in the next couple of months. We know that the 6th-ranked Dricus du Plessis defended his title against Sean Strickland. The 7th-ranked Bilal Muhammad is slated to take on Jack Della Maddalena in the main event of UFC 315 in May. The 9th-ranked Leon Edwards, who actually has rose one spot recently in this rankings, as you can see, is taking on Sean Brady in the main event of UFC London, March 22nd. And Alexander Volkanovski at number 11 is fighting for that vacated featherweight title that Ilia Topuria gave up. And to become a 2-time champion, Volkanovski will be taking on Diego Lopez. That goes down at UFC 314 in April. Now let's round up the totals from the entire month. All 4 cards, they combined for 47 fights with 16 KO TKOs, 5 submissions, 25 decisions, and 1 draw. We saw 10 first-round knockouts, 5 second-round knockouts, and 1 in the 4th. That was Jared Cannonier against Gregory Rodriguez in the main event of UFC Vegas 102. We saw 3 first-round submissions, 1 second-round submission, and 1 in the 3rd round. Of the 25 decisions, 20 of them would see the judges all agree, 4 would be split decisions, and the 1 very rare technical decision in the main event of UFC Seattle. And then we would see the 1 draw, a majority draw, at UFC 312 between Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato. Of the 47 fights, there were 2 divisions that had very minimal action in the month of February, and that was the flyweight division and the women's bantamweight division, both with just 1 fight. And the division that had the most fights in February shouldn't come as a surprise, and that is because the middleweight division had 3 main events in itself and capped out with 9 total fights. We saw 7 fights at featherweight, 6 fights apiece at lightweight and bantamweight, 5 fights at heavyweight, 4 fights each at light heavyweight and welterweight, and 2 fights apiece at women's flyweight and strawweight. And now let's get into the UFC newcomers that got victories in their debut fight, and there's quite a lot of them to talk about here. At UFC Saudi Arabia, we would see the Contender Series alum Bogdan Grad defeat Lucas Alexander via TKO 4 minutes and 22 seconds into round 2 of their fight. I already mentioned UFC 312 earlier and how it had a lot of unranked fighters and a lot of newcomers to the UFC. Well, 4 of those newcomers got victories in their debut bout. The first fight of the night, Kilian Sakhild would defeat Anshul Jubli in just 19 seconds with a brutal TKO. Jonathan McAuliffe would defeat the veteran Kevin Jousset via unanimous decision in the welterweight division. The brother of Ilia Topuria, Alexandre Topuria, would defeat training partner of Alexander Volkanovski, Colby Thickness, so the rivalry continues. That was a unanimous decision at bantamweight. And in the heavyweight division, Taliesin Teixeira would defeat Justin Tafa in just 35 seconds with an elbow up against the fence. At UFC Vegas 102, we would see 2 newcomers get victories in their debuts. The bantamweight Elijah Smith, son of UFC veteran and OG pioneer Maurice Smith, he would defeat Vince Morales via unanimous decision. And Jose Delgado, training partner of Jared Cannonier, got a victory on the very same night, and it was a first-round knockout over Connor Matthews in the featherweight division. And lastly, at UFC Seattle, we would see 2018 Dana White Contender Series alum Austin Vanderford make good on his debut. The longtime Bellator veteran and title challenger in that promotion made his short notice debut in the UFC on just 4 days. He defeated Nikolai Veretinikov via TKO in the second round. That was in the welterweight division, although the fight technically took place at a catchweight 175 pounds. And last but not least, let's talk about what we can look forward to in the month of March, and it is quite a lot, as we will see 5 Saturdays in the month and 5 UFC events. First is UFC Vegas 103, which is going down this coming Saturday, March 1st. Number 6, Manel Kape versus number 8, Asu Almabayev in the men's flyweight division. The following weekend, March 8th, will be UFC 313, headlined by the light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira versus the number 1 ranked Magomed Ankalaev. March 15th, the UFC heads back to the Apex for UFC Vegas 104 in a rematch between the 8th ranked middleweight Marvin Vettori and the 11th ranked Roman Dolidze. Then the UFC will go abroad for the following 2 weeks. First, at UFC London, March 22nd, the number 1 ranked former champion Leon Edwards takes on semi-short notice replacement and 5th ranked Sean Brady, who is taking place of the 4th ranked Jack Della Maddalena. And finally, in Mexico City, Mexico, March 29th, the number 2 ranked former champion Brandon Moreno will take on the 9th ranked former title challenger Steve Erceg. It was a huge month in February and an even bigger month coming in March for the UFC, and I am here to preview and break down every single one of those cards, the biggest and best storylines and what is at stake heading in, and recapping the most meaningful results each week coming out. I also give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements, and of course, monthly video series such as this one, The State of, at the end of each month. If you are new to the channel and enjoy this type of content, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe. We continue to chase the goal of 1,000 subscribers in 2025. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes release every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video.